Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Miller from the Santa Fe Group Shared Assessments Program, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Summit webinar series, Supply Chain Resilience in the Crosshairs, Predictive Strategies for Proactive Solutions, which is being sponsored by our good friends from Aravo. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jackie, who will introduce our esteemed panelists. Jackie?
Thank you, Charlie. We are so happy at Aravo to be part of the shared assessments community, and thank you everybody for being here. As Charlie said, I'm Jackie Risley. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Aravo Solutions. I'm joined today by Nitin Walia, who is the Chief Client Officer at Aravo's partner company, Rapid Ratings. And our panelists today are Jean-Francois Valette. He is the head of global third-party compliance and risk management at eBay. Prior to that, he was the head of operations for Volkswagen Payments and the head of outsourcing and global third-party compliance at PayPal. He has a law degree and investment management certificate specializing in compliance, risk management, and outsourcing. And we also have Chris King. Chris King has more than 20 years of experience in third-party risk management, internal audit, client assurance, and software development. He is the head of third-party risk management at Synovus, Synovus. And when he's not doing that in his free time, he enjoys outdoor activities with his family like fishing and camping. We're going to get to them in just a minute, but I just want to set the stage a little bit and talk a little bit about how we're positioning supply chain resilience today. And we're really talking about how to assess your third party's ability to remain viable when emerging risks become realities. So we're not necessarily talking about a physical supply chain. Obviously, many of us find that we have to rely on third parties such as service providers or partners or brokers in order to continue to maintain our business. And so we're talking about those kinds of partnerships as well. The SIG and other tools do a really good job of helping us to assess business continuity and to look at all of those things kind of at onboarding. But we really need to think about how we look at that when those things become a reality. How does that business continuity plan work in real life? For instance, how do we identify alternate sources of supply more quickly than our competitors? And we know that there are concentrations geographically and amongst different service providers that our competitors rely on as well. And so we really have to, in an emergency, be able to respond as quickly as we can. And we know that these have a lot of costs. There's the obvious cost of disruption when you can't provide your goods or services to your customers. But there are lingering costs that go far beyond that. For example, the reduction in customer lifetime value. If a customer loses faith in your ability to deliver, or if a customer tries an alternate product and doesn't come back to you following a disruption, all of those have long-term impact on your organization. And of course, there are potential regulatory violations for many of you who are in essential industries. COVID-19 is really just the largest recent test of organizational resilience. But we've kind of given a couple examples here. There are all kinds of other things that can come up. We have natural disasters. We have geopolitical problems. We have cybersecurity issues. And of course, the virus itself has some lingering impacts.
If I can interrupt for a moment, for me on the screen, it looks like you're still in the opening slide of the deck. Is that where you intend to be?
No, it is not. Let me stop and reshare.
That's great. I can see it now.
Great. Sorry about that. When we were talking about the impact of COVID-19, by April, Axios was saying that 75% of businesses were reporting that they had a supply chain disruption related to the pandemic. And just a little while later, Almonte did a study in which they found that 74% of manufacturing business leaders said that supply chain disruption or constraint posed the greatest threat over the next 12 months. And Business Continuity Institute, BCI, has done some evaluation on what that costs industries. And so for many organizations, the cost of having a disruption is going to be about $100 million or more. So, and 30%, 7% of those disruptions, according to BCI, are going to be caused at tier 2 and beyond. The World Economic Forum also did some research and looked at the impact of disruption on a small supplier. And many even large organizations do rely on small suppliers for important components of their supply chain. And the average small supplier can stay solvent for about 27 days through a shutdown. So if you're relying on a small supplier, it's really important to understand where they're at. Aravo every year does a taking the pulse of third-party risk management survey. And this year, just right around pandemic time, we found that 51% of organizations aren't assessing the business continuity risk of their vendors at all. 62% are not assessing the financial viability of their third parties, and 52% are not assessing the operational risks of their third parties. And so there's a real gap there in terms of understanding the resilience of the vendors and their own ability to be able to maintain operations. So as we look at kind of the bigger picture of how COVID-19 has influenced different industries, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers and ask, how have you employed tools and technology to protect your business from disruption in the wake of COVID-19? Maybe Chris, we could start with you.
Yes, Jackie, and thank you for that lead in. I appreciate the privilege to speak today. And Synovus, we've been in the last 12 to 18 months kind of in an overhaul transformation of our TPRM program to move it from a more fragmented approach to a more integrated program. And so one of the big things that we've been focused on is making sure not only do we have the tools and the systems in place and that those tools and systems are in a centralized application that TPRM controls, but we also want to make sure that the data within those systems is accurate and has integrity. And so, we've been working on that, and when the COVID pandemic hit, it really paid dividends for us because we were able to utilize Aravo to send a COVID-19 impact questionnaire to all of our critical suppliers. And having all that information in one system as far as, who our critical suppliers were, who the contacts of those companies were, and being able to quickly deploy that using Aravo proved instrumental. And so that was a big help for us.
Jean-Francois, how about you?
Yeah, well, again, like Chris mentioned, thanks for the introduction and for allowing me to be part of the panel today. But yeah, to jump on what Chris just mentioned, I think yes, definitely we've seen that automation has been essential, especially in those times right now. But it's been even more as we within eBay have been in implementation and transformation around TPRM and the need around TPRM for the company globally. And in order to support that for a company like eBay and the outreach from a global perspective has been essential. That of course is not to forget about the need to make sure that as we have and secure data around our third parties through any type of automation, we also deal with those data and capture data from external parties, kind of enhancing the information we have and the intelligence we've been gathering about our vendors. And all those points and all those reach and connection within a central program within eBay has paid dividends, and we keep on upgrading and making sure that we're making it efficient for the company, as well as for the business users, to be in a situation where we're on top of understanding what our vendor landscape or third-party landscape looks like for the company, as well as making sure that within those special or extraordinary times that we're all living through right now, that we can take benefits of those automation and the technology we've been engaging on for the past couple of years. So again, it's all about we've shown being proactive in the past has paid off in a situation like this one, but of course we're all in a reactive mode right now because no one was expecting what has been happening for the past 8-7 months, all depending where you are in the world. But yeah, it's definitely been what's been important to us is making sure that those tools work not alone for a program, but also for its users and the stakeholders we support and engage on within the company, but as well for third parties, making sure that they are able to provide us with the intelligence and information we need. So voilà.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Nitin for just a second here.
Thanks, Jackie. And actually, if you could just click back, I've got a few thoughts on the tools and technology as well. Just building on some of what I've heard from Chris and Jean-Francois. We think about technology and the way we see folks using technology is effectively a way to collaborate better and more closely and more efficiently with suppliers and third parties. And in this moment, in 2020 in particular, with all of the uncertainty that COVID-19 has brought, we've seen sort of two principal ways that folks are doing that. The first is, how do we efficiently get awareness of really what is the picture? And to the comment that Jean-Francois just made, automation has been essential here because there is more to understand than ever before, and the pressure to do so quickly is stronger than ever before. So we've definitely seen that increase in the client base of Rapid Ratings. One of the things we track is for the unique users monthly accessing financial profiles of their suppliers. And when we look at Q2 2020 versus 2019, we see a 90% increase. So folks are spending more time trying to understand their suppliers and third parties, and they're doing it more regularly. And the second piece, really to get to the theme of today's topic, is once we have awareness, how do we get predictability? And one of the trends we are seeing is really an increased adoption and interest in things like stress tests. And Chris, certainly being in a financial institution at Synovus, is intimately familiar with just how often different stress tests will be used to measure and manage the resilience of an organization. But we are really seeing an interest well beyond the traditional financial venue and into large global supply chains and third-party communities where folks are saying, how bad could things get if the macroeconomic indicators and the virus progress exhibited a certain set of characteristics? What would that mean for the resilience and the strength of my supply chain going forward? So, I would just say that those two things together have definitely been, from our vantage point, really a significant increase in the use of technology. And one of the things that I think is really noteworthy and that makes the current moment particularly concerning is that financial health globally, corporate financial health, was already strained coming into this crisis. And if you could just advance, Jackie, what you can see on the bottom is the spread between countries where corporate financial health is weak, which is red, meaning it's declining, and stronger, which is blue, meaning it's an uptick. And if we go back to 2016 and 17, you could see that it's pretty well balanced. But the closer we get to the current moment, the more that we see really a tremendous shift where in virtually every country in the world, when we look at the financial health of corporate entities, and these are the companies making up global supply chains and third-party communities, what we see is a dramatic decline. And the reason that is concerning is it means that companies came into this crisis already vulnerable. And that really heightens the importance and the necessity of collaborating effectively so that you can understand what these third parties and these vendors are going through and how you can work better together. And so with that, the question I'd like to put to the group, and maybe Chris, this time we can start with you, is what additional initiatives have you and your organization taken to increase collaboration with vendors in 2020?
Yeah, Nitin, thank you. So the topic I wanted to bring up in this question for Synovus, it's been a big initiative this year for 2020, is TPRM did a complete overhaul of our quarterly business review process starting in January. And what we found, I'll try not to speak too long here, but the feedback that we got from our first line of defense vendor managers was the quarterly business review process was time consuming, it was tedious, it was very disruptive to the business. We had some vendors that were coming on site to do QBRs, and QBR meetings were taking 2 and 3 hours sometimes. They were trying to sell products and services during the QBR meeting, and so obviously that was a negative item that we wanted to address. The other thing that we noticed is there was no centralized or standardization across the company. So some areas of the company, maybe like IT, they did a pretty good job of holding QBRs and documenting the information, but other groups maybe not so much. And so the way we address that is, first off, we held vendor manager training for all of our vendor managers on how to hold effective QBRs, what should be included in a QBR, what should not be included. Then we address the vendor side by having all of our vendor managers send our vendors a letter of what Synovus expects to get out of a QBR. What we want the vendor to include in their presentation, what they should not be including. And then lastly, we created some standardized templates for each vendor manager to use. So that way, all QBRs, regardless of the vendor, type of vendor that it was, or regardless of the area of the business, they would all use this same template that we would then upload and store in Aravo. And that's been huge. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that process. And the benefit to that on the back end, it's given the TPRM team data that we can use and report to our executives and actually up to the board. We actually report our QBR results to the board of directors to let them know, here are the areas where we're holding effective QBRs, here are the areas where we may need some work, here's the average time that a QBR is taking. And so what we have found, it's worked on both sides. The frontline business managers are happy, but the vendors are happy as well, because it's facilitated communication both ways. And then the last thing that we've done in that, and I'll end there, is we committed to our vendor managers that TPRM would attend at least one QBR per year per vendor, which is a big ask, considering how many vendors we have. But having that partnership with our vendor managers and letting them know that, you're not on your own, we're not building this process, and then kind of, just, leaving you to your own devices, I think has been huge. It's created, partnership between, our function and the vendor managers, and, it's been big.
And Chris, there's just in context, there's a question from the audience, and generally we'll try to push these to the end, but this one I think is just relevant in context. Are the vendor managers in the business, or are they part of the COE? This comes from one of our attendees.
They're in the business, so it'd be considered, the first line of defense. The primary vendor manager is the person that has the day-to-day relationship and is responsible for managing that vendor on a day-to-day basis. It's not TPRM. We would be considered a second line of defense. So yeah, they're responsible for holding the business reviews, and then our business reviews, they can be quarterly, they can be semi-annually. It really depends on the risk classification that TPRM is assigned. dictates the schedule and the frequency that they have to hold those meetings.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Jean-Francois, what are your thoughts on additional initiatives to increase collaboration this year?
Everything that Chris said. No, on top of what Chris mentioned, I think initiatives, additional initiatives. It's all depending on the maturity of what your TPRM program looks like. You can always add to initiatives you're taking in terms of maturity reach. What we've seen as being essential for 2020 and in the future as well is everything comes to, of course, knowing and engaging with your vendors, but it's also educating them. It's great to put a TPRM program, but if there is no sense of education, either internally with your stakeholders and the business units, the vendor managers within those business units, as well as with the vendors, it's going to be a relative huge effort to get people engaged. So education comes through, of course, communication. It can come through get through QBR and discussions with the vendors directly. But it's also making sure that you keep that engagement close internally, so vendor managers and the business that are actually in charge and responsible for that vendor relationship are passing on that the message. But it's also being available, making sure that as a TPRM program owner or as a team, you make yourself available to make sure that the collaboration with your third parties is growing in the best interest of all. It's not alone for the company to be secure and make sure that the governance model is on top for everything related to third parties, but it's also making sure that your third parties are aware of your intents when you're looking at a TPRM. So it's definitely been one of the major drive for us is making sure that we keep on educating everyone involved throughout the process. At the same time, and it's still education is essential, it's also making sure that we keep the user experience as great as possible. And I'm not going to come back to the first questions when we talked about automation and tools, but it's definitely what makes things easier for everyone. It's making sure that from a user experience perspective, when you're trying to address your requirements to your third parties, they have a way that is friendly enough or understanding enough, sorry, sometimes my English is funky, but is smooth enough for them to engage. So it's definitely been those initiatives that we're looking at. But on top of that, and eBay being a global company, is also making sure that we adapt ourselves in the program, not only from a global perspective, but also from a local and regional perspective. That is true in the US, it's true in the Americas overall, it's true in Europe, in APAC, in Middle East and Africa as well. What we need to make sure of is that we address our program in a way that is answering our requirements from a regulatory perspective, from a governance perspective, and from a risk management perspective. And that has been definitely the drive that we have internally, but also with the third parties we're dealing with, because those third parties within our organization, they may be supporting our business in the US, but at the same time supporting directly or indirectly other business units across the globe. So we need to make sure that we answer those requirements we have and those requirements that our third parties have to the best extent. So this is really where at the end, and not to repeat myself again, but education and communication is essential throughout the program.
Thanks, Jeff. That's really good insight. I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in terms of vendor collaboration too is that, you know, programs have really stepped up to what it means to collaborate with their vendors. And so, you know, in the kinds of outreach that Chris and JF are talking about, I've seen it with other vendors or with other organizations as well, is that they're having these conversations with their vendors that are taking on a different tone. And not only asking like, are you going to be able to deliver, but saying, how can I help to make sure that you can deliver? You know, is there something you need from me in terms of, you know, do we need to change some payment terms? Do I need to manage some expectations so that people are really collaborating genuinely? And I think that's been a really kind of a nice thing that I've seen come out of a very negative situation. One of the things that we've also seen is that, you know, that internally the mood has changed as well. And so PwC has been doing a series of surveys about priorities in the midst of the pandemic. And in April, they found that 54% of CFOs were saying that financial health of suppliers was a top 3 priority. Now, I don't have the data from a year ago to go back and see, but I don't think that really looking at financial viability of vendors was the top priority for the CFOs. Certainly important, but I don't know if it was in the top 3. And if we look at even the other things that have become priorities, they're mostly things that are related to third-party risk management and how it really delivers value to the business. So, you know, developing alternate sources and additional sources of supply, understanding the financial and operational health of suppliers. They may not change contract terms, but being able to provide data to help understand what the right changes are in contractual terms to help to understand and to mitigate risks. Extending visibility into your suppliers' networks. Being able to improve risk protection measures, using automation. I think, you know, that's something that we've heard from Jean-Francois and Chris throughout this conversation, is the importance of having that automation so you can make fast and accurate decisions. So given that, the next thing I kind of like to ask you is what changes have you seen in the types of asks and the levels of engagement in your third-party risk programs from your boards and from your regulators? And so, Jean-Francois, why don't we start with you?
I'm the lucky one to start this time. In regards to the question and in regards to what we see as ask, depending on the level of leadership, of course, it's boards, it's regulators, but it's also a different type of leadership within the company. I think what's being coming up more and more often is making sure that when we build and we reach out to third parties, it's making sure that throughout the company there is an alignment on what we're trying to achieve, and it's making sure that all key stakeholders, the control functions, are aligned in the way we want to reach out, and that's been essential. And from that perspective, coming to leadership, it's also been answering the needs that we have from our regulatory frameworks that we need to follow. And it's true in the US, but it's true in Europe, it's true in APAC, is making sure that across the board, we're capturing the information and the intelligence that is sufficient for us to address and assess the needs that we need to compile in terms to the assessment. And that is true for financial health, that is true for cyber risk, that is true for ethics, that is true for sanctions screening, that is true for many of the controls that we require. And there is no specificities in terms of the ask on one of the controls more than the other. It is making sure overall that when we look at third parties, we have a broad understanding of what are the risks that they may represent to the company, but as well, what are the mitigation action they are taking, or what are the controls they have put in place in order to mitigate those identified risks. And that is definitely the ask we've seen, is making sure that, yes, of course, there is a focus on certain aspect of risk, and financial health is definitely one that is growing, but not alone. It's making sure that we have the information needed, and that we can easily and proactively extract that information from the intelligence we've been able to gather, either internally with our third parties or from external sources as well. And that's been the ask from regulators as well, but definitely from boards and leadership within the company.
Yeah, thanks, Jean-Francois. And I know, Chris, you've also been having interesting conversations with your board, and regulatory issues are always top of mind. What changes have you seen? Are you seeing some new asks?
So yeah, obviously, Synovus being a financial institution, risk is always at the forefront in all aspects of the company, not just third-party risk. And our board, third-party risk, we meet with our board twice a year, and they're very engaged. And so one of the things that we've been focused on, I mentioned, we're kind of trying to transform our program a little bit here and make sure the information we provide is useful. When I present to our board, I don't want to just give them, how can I say this? I don't want to give them a presentation just so full of stats and facts to where they can't really digest it in the limited time that I have to speak with them, and they don't ask questions. I want to make sure I'm giving them useful information that presents what the third-party risks are within the company, so that they can ask, informed questions. And the few meetings that I've had with them, because I've only been with Synovus about a year, it's been very good. I've gotten feedback that, wow, that's the most engaged they've ever been about third-party risk, since I've been with the company. So that was good to hear. And then from the regulator standpoint, ironically, the last meeting I had with them was in February of this year. They're obviously very interested in some of the changes that we're implementing throughout our program. So that was, right before COVID was just kicking off. And so I'm sure the next meeting I have with them, there will be discussions about what our response has been and what issues we've seen. I am getting asked from other areas of the company. So just because the regulators aren't directly speaking to third-party risk, they're always reviewing some aspect of the bank, right? And so what I'm finding is I'm getting asked from our information security teams or our IT teams, where those teams are getting asked third-party or vendor-related questions that they might not be best equipped to answer. And so then they reach out to me as a third-party risk person. And luckily, knock on wood, up to this point, all the data and improvements that we put in the system in the last year have really paid off, because I've been able to provide, information and answers to them very quickly, which of course they were very happy about.
And Chris, I think one of the comments you just made that I really liked was this notion that sort of stuffing people with a lot of stats is sometimes less valuable than making sure you're curating the right useful information. And one of the aspects that makes that even more challenging for folks who are managing supplier and third-party risk programs is the sheer number of risk control areas. And one of the shifts that we are noting, and certainly a characteristic of the most resilient supply chains and third-party programs, is a recognition increasingly that these risk control areas are not siloed. They're not totally separate from one another. And to really get value out of the program and to protect your business most effectively, it's important to understand what the relationships are. And you can be more proactive if you understand that in some cases, a particular risk control area may have bearing on another, some may be predictive of others. And our perspective from Rapid Ratings is very much rooted in financial health as a key control area. And because financial health really speaks to a company's ability to make investments in all these other core areas, to dedicate the resources to protect their business in the other risk control areas, it's really a foundation for a company's ability to invest versus just another one of the risk control areas. And that's one particular example, but there are any number of different relationships between these different elements. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on how third-party risk programs can incorporate these interactions. And Jean-Francois, maybe we'll start with you. If you can give us your thoughts on that from eBay's perspective.
Sorry, I was on mute. So yes, definitely. I think what is essential when you look at the interactions between the different risk areas is the way we've built our program is what I call the core satellites approach. So of course you have a core, that's the TPRM program itself. And then you have all the satellites, which are the different control functions. That can be information security, that can be ethics, that can be resiliency, that can be compliance, legal, treasury, procurement. All those stakeholders have a major stake in the process. And by creating a central point of engagement and being able to connect all those stakeholders through a common approach and a common goal has shown to be efficient. That was the same approach I took at PayPal, and the idea is to make sure that not alone does the different risk areas get what they need in order to proceed with their assessment, but also others can benefit of the information and the knowledge and expertise of others. And I think this is instrumental throughout the process. It's like I often use the same example when you build a house. It's common sense, you know. You want to make sure that you bring together a plumber, an electrician, a painter, and that those guys talk to one another before they do anything. Because if the electrician comes after the painter, what happens? He needs to tear down the wall and needs to start again. So it's exactly the same thing when you're looking at interactions with the different control functions and risk areas overall, is making sure that there is a sense of communication. There is a core where people can rely on and benefit from, and that's what TPRM program at eBay and other companies have been modeled like, and I think it's essential.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's very fascinating, and I think the analogy about building a home is a really helpful one. Chris, what's your take from the U.S. financial institution perspective on understanding these interactions?
Yeah, so I'll just build on what Jean-Francois added as well. Centralization, in my opinion, is key. Before we had Aravo and Rapid Ratings and some of the other tools that we use, we had a very fragmented process. We obviously have a lot of different compliance areas that all play a certain part of the overall third-party risk management function. But I like that you said that, the financial piece is kind of the foundation, and that's kind of how we've designed our program, particularly when we're onboarding vendors. So TPRM, our team is responsible for doing a financial check and a sanctions check. That's the first step in the process. When a vendor is onboarded, obviously if it doesn't pass that check, we don't even want to continue. But if it does make it through that, all of the other compliance areas, they may use other tools and other systems to do their reviews and build their assessments and their reports. But ultimately, we want those reports and that information to be in a centralized location, because at the end of the day, it's not just what you say you can do, it's what you can prove you can do. And so having all of that information in one place that I can easily pull. So if a regulator or internal audit or just, from my own knowledge, I can go to a vendor easily and I can say, okay, here's what our AML team said. Okay, here's what our corporate insurance team, here was their assessment. Here was our consumer compliance group. And to have all that information in one spot is, I really don't know how you can do it without it. I'm sure there are ways, and before I came to Synovus, I think, they were doing all that through email and file shares and office documents. And again, if there's anybody on the call and you're doing it that way, I'm not, don't take that the wrong way. But yeah, centralization is just, it just opens up so many doors and makes things so much easier. In our compliance areas, they've really bought into it. They've seen not only that it can help us, but it can help them as well. And so they love it. Yeah, they get their task in Aravo, it comes through, they complete it, done, and they don't have to worry about it. So yeah, that's been huge for us.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. And Jackie, how does that mirror what you are hearing across the Aravo customer community?
Oh, it's exactly what we hear again across our community. We're really focused on centralization. We've worked with analysts to create a maturity model, and it's clear that you really can't get to having the most agile and efficient kind of program unless you can break down those silos and you can have all of those risk areas working together. Chris mentioned some of those things, right? The reporting up to the board and just the efficiency and having that single view of what the risk profile of your third-party ecosystem is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's clear agreement across the group that consolidating and centralizing the data from these different control areas better empowers folks to understand the relationships. The other sort of age-old challenge and issue with building successful supplier risk programs is this question of how you engage your business stakeholders as partners to the effort. And just building on some of the comments we've heard around things like user experience and making sure you have a value proposition for all stakeholders. I guess I'd love to get thoughts of the panel on this question. So maybe Jean-Francois, if you could talk to us about how to engage with business stakeholders in particular.
I can surely. I think the way you can engage with your business stakeholders is making sure that you're making it efficient, and you're making it in a way that their experience overall is not being disrupted, or what I mean by that is not disrupted in a way that they're being annoyed, but in a way that that you make clear that what you're requiring from them is in their best interest. So again, as I addressed earlier on the discussion, it's about education, it's about communication. This is clearly the most effective way, is making sure that you keep on educating your stakeholders, you keep on educating the business overall, as well as your vendors. And at the same time that you listen to what they have to say, because that helps you maybe upgrade or make slight changes that make life easier for everyone. So it's a matter of communication. It's making sure that people understand as well that they are in control of their vendors, and we're there to support them to make sure that they're in control and that they can take actions when it's needed. Yet again, it's all about making sure that it's a partnership that you build throughout the experience in the program overall.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Francois. And Chris, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, Jean-Francois, he nailed pretty much everything. The only thing I would add to that would be just simplicity. Make your processes simple. Your business stakeholders, they're not only a vendor manager, right? I mean, they have their day-to-day job that they're trying to do. So they're going into the system to enter an engagement for a renewal. Don't make the system, overly complex or just difficult to use. Yeah, take, the user experience, like y'all mentioned, into account. Make it simple. Make sure your workflows communicate to them in a way that they know, what the next steps are. So here at Synovus, we've put a lot of effort into that. And so anytime a request gets submitted through our TPRM system, they always get a confirmation that says, hey, we've received your request. Here are the next steps in the process, 1 through 5 or 1 through 10 or whatever the number of steps are. And here are the steps in that process that you're going to receive an automated communication on when the workflow has proceeded down that process. And so, yeah, just communicating with them, keeping it simple, because you have to remember, many times, they're super busy. They're just wanting to get something done. They don't want it to be overly complex, but they also want to be engaged so they know, what the next steps are.
Yeah, that's great advice from both of you. Absolutely, getting that engagement from your business stakeholders is so important. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here. We're running a little bit short on time, but I don't know if, like the rest of you, you're looking forward to putting 2020 behind us and looking forward to 2021. And so would love to get kind of your insights on looking to 2021 and beyond. What are the emerging risks that you're looking to manage proactively? Chris, do you want to start?
Since we're short on time, I'll just focus on one. For me personally, it's going to be fourth party risk. We are building a collection, a list, a database, if you will, of who our fourth party vendors are. We gather that information as part of our third party risk assessments that our vendors complete through Aravo. And what we're starting to see are some patterns. For example, I can go and look and say, okay, across our critical and high risk vendors, are there fourth parties that are being used across multiple vendors? And if that fourth party were to have an issue, it would impact multiple vendors on our end. So just looking for those nuggets in the data, if you will, and how we could potentially do ongoing monitoring of our fourth parties, which is always a very difficult thing in our space. We all know that. But yeah, really just going to try to focus on that in 2021. Like I said, we're off to a good start, but I don't think anybody would say that they've nailed that. It's just always going to kind of be a work in progress.
I hear that every time I'm in a discussion with TPRM professionals. The fourth party puzzle is definitely something everybody's working on. Jean-Francois, how about you?
Yeah, well, I think I echo what Chris just mentioned. I think the outsourcing chain overall is definitely going to be a major focus in 2021, as it's been through 2020 with the current situation. And we don't know what 2021 is going to look like. Is it going to be a bis repetita from 2020? Hopefully not. I think adding to what Chris mentioned, yes, concentration risk is definitely something that will also become more and more important. Making sure that we keep our third-party landscape diverse, but not too diverse, but also making sure that we're not concentrating our risk within specific regions, within specific categories, within specific third parties overall. And of course, resiliency and cybersecurity. I think those two have been definitely the major points of 2020 with the new and the fact that everyone had to adapt to a new way of working remotely mostly for those that were lucky enough to do it. So yeah, we will see those coming more and more aggressively within our focus, making sure that we align to the regulatory obligations we'll have, and you'll probably see regulators push on those that Chris and I just mentioned. And yeah, overall, I think it will be making sure that we keep good track of financial viability, cybersecurity, resiliency, outsourcing chain, everything that is relevant to make sure that your supply chain is sustainable and viable for your business and day-to-day operations.
Absolutely.
And we think that another big emerging risk is companies' ability to access funding. Corporate leverage is now 49% of GDP. Debt issuances, especially high yield, are higher than ever. And companies will find it harder to refinance that, especially the small and medium-sized businesses that make up really the bulk of global supply chains and third-party communities. So if it's okay, maybe we'll briefly summarize some of, I think, the themes that emerged today. And such a rich conversation. I think we could have spent the whole hour on any one of these questions, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to do so. But first and foremost, it's clear that the current moment has been a powerful catalyst for increased awareness of the value that supplier and third-party risk programs bring to their organizations. Leadership and board support is stronger than ever. And to make the most of that opportunity, it's important that when folks are designing these programs, they are beginning with a clear understanding of their goals, because there's a risk of overshooting. And so if you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, then you can really leverage the attention and the positive momentum for these programs to make serious progress for your organizations. And the final piece that I'll say, comment on, is that stakeholder alignment and engagement is key. And this means you need to have a user experience and a value prop that speaks to your business stakeholders, to your boards, to your regulators, and critically to the suppliers and third parties themselves, so that they can really be collaborative partners in the process rather than just subjects of the program.
Yeah, and part of that is having a strategy for assessing and mitigating the risks before and after a potentially disruptive event has occurred. And that's obviously related to having those relationships with your suppliers. Consider the impact of fourth parties and the ways to collect and use that data. Engage your third parties as partners in this effort. Develop strong predictive analytics. Focus on data governance to understand what intelligence already exists internally. Platforms that help you consolidate data against across risk areas and sources will help you to better understand these relationships. So I know we're coming kind of up against time. Would love to have you take a look at the slides, and would welcome any questions you have about what Aravo is doing. We've, in response to some of our customers' experiences, we have productized some of the things Chris has talked about into our supply chain resilience application. I am sure that the rapid ratings team has more to share with you about the financial health. And I just want to make sure that I have a minute to bring this slide up here, so that in case we don't get to questions, please know that you can reach out to us and ask us questions directly. We would love to hear from you. I don't know, Laura, do we have time to take a question?
Sure. If you we have a minute or two, you can. You have. I think Nitin has a question that wasn't addressed earlier.
Great.
I do, yeah. So I'll put this to the group at large in the interest of time. This is from Matt Urban, who's got an initiative to determine who their critical supply chain vendors are. So number one, what have folks done to discover and determine who's critical? And then number two, having done that, how have folks evaluated those vendors? So maybe we'll start with question one, and maybe all we have time for, but how do you get to who's a critical vendor?
I can take that because we've recently just gone through that exact process at Synovus. So like I mentioned, I started with the company in July of last year. I inherited a vendor master list that obviously already had ratings assigned to them. So there were some critical vendors, high risk, moderate, lows. And so since we were relatively early on in the process of implementing Aravo, we chose to reassess all of our existing critical and all of our existing high-risk vendors via Aravo and via our inherent risk scoring model. And that was not an easy process. I mean, it required, reaching out to who the line of business owner was for that particular vendor, having them enter an engagement in Aravo so that information can be scored, reaching out to the vendor, having them complete a risk questionnaire that's incorporated into our scoring model, and then a bunch of other things that go into that scoring model as well. And so we just had to bite it off in manageable chunks. Like I said, we started with our criticals, and then we worked on our highs. And one of the initiatives I didn't speak on the last question about 2021, now we're going through our moderates, which is hundreds of vendors. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I guess there's no easy answer to that, but just kind of start at the vendors that you feel contain the highest risk to your organization. Start there, and I think what you'll find is maybe some of those vendors are rated too low, and maybe some are rated too high, and so there'll be a little bit of movement there. But again, having a system that can give you an inherent risk score and having a defined risk appetite within your company on what you'll accept, will certainly help guide you on which direction you need to go. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. If I may add, if you don't mind, just adding a couple of things. I think it's all depending on your business and the type of business you're implementing your TPRM in, but as well as, and Chris nailed that within his answer, is making sure that what the impact to your business. And I think for that there are many different ways to look at it, and one of the way that people often let aside is all material is a relationship or a third party to your business. And materiality is something that comes a lot within regulatory framework, and it's very hard to define exactly what it is, but there are simple ways of addressing it through different very simple questions you can ask yourself about a vendor, and you can ask and meet with your business. So one thing, meet with your business stakeholders, the major business units within your company, and engage with them and understand what are their main third parties or vendors or partners they're dealing with. This will already help you get a first foot in that process.
Thank you so much. There was so much wisdom here that we couldn't barely fit it all in. But as Nitin said, I hope we have an opportunity to continue this discussion again another time. Thank you both very much, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Jackie,
Thanks,
Nitin,
everybody.
Chris, Jean-Francois, thank you so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.